There's a lot of history in this cemetery, obviously.
Yeah, and today what we're going to do is we're going to take you on a tour of the cemetery and learn some of the history of when it was built and who was buried here.
We have a lot of interesting things set up for you here today. We got a lot of things we're going to show you, so we're really excited, and we're glad that you're going to be a part of it.
So we came to the center part of the cemetery.
Yeah, as we were walking through here, this monument kind of caught our eye here because it's one of the largest ones in the cemetery, obviously.
Yeah, it's very prominent.
It is.
And I think it's the Martin Shares stone.
It is. I was reading it just a second ago, and it is the Martin Shares monument. So it's a very interesting piece, and it's a very beautiful piece here in the cemetery.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think each side of the stone has a family member's name, I believe.
That's right, it does. Yeah. And hello.
Welcome.
Hi,
Welcome.
Who are you?
Martin Shares.
He does
Martin Shares.
Yeah, it looks like the picture I saw earlier today of Martin Shares. How
well,
are you, sir?
It's nice
I'm
to
doing
meet
fine.
you.
Good to, thank you for coming by. I appreciate the respect that you've shown my monument.
And do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, of course, my name is Martin Shares. Moved here with my family back from South Carolina, and it was bought this 128 acres from Dr. Haddock, and we have that house across the way there that's known today as Ferguson Hall.
Yes, we're familiar with Ferguson Hall.
We are familiar with that.
That's the house that we had built over there in 1852, 53, and of course we donated the land here for the cemetery.
Oh, that's right. I heard that. You were the first one to donate the entire land, or the first?
Well, 1 acre. We donated 1 acre of land for a city cemetery. And of course, in those days, an acre of land would have probably taken care of the whole town.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because it was small back then.
It was.
It's growing fast now, of course.
I don't know if you've noticed anything, but there are some people standing behind us.
Oh,
do you know
who
anything
are they?
about that?
Well, let's
Mr.
just take a look here.
Who are those people?
Well, when the cemetery was first started, there were several ladies that worked very diligently and lovingly to care for the cemetery, the monuments. Mrs. John Shares and Mrs. O'Deal and Mrs. Wade and let's see, who else was here? There were 4 of them that just very faithfully took care of keeping the cemetery looking nice and neat and clean.
And are those people all buried here in the cemetery?
Yes, they are. They're all deceased and live here in the cemetery, or died here, and they are here.
And do we have an organization that still takes place?
Well,
it was.
it actually in September of 1922, there was a group of people that met together in the old Springhill Bank, and they formed the Cemetery Association. And that association, in turn, took care of plotting the cemetery and acquiring additional land. And the land was then sold. A plot went for $12, all the way up to more recent years. You could get a plot still in the cemetery for about $99 or $120. So the original price for a lot in the cemetery was $12. $12. And of course, one of the things that y'all should be interested in, the first person to be buried in the cemetery was Mrs. Owens, Miss Owens. She was buried here, and then the others were buried. That was in 1840. 1840.
Well, do you mind giving us a tour?
No, not at all. Come walk with me.
And so we come to this next spot, and I have to ask, why is it got a gate around it?
A lot of the fences were put up to keep livestock out of the graveyard, and of course later the fences were put up all around, but individual families would put fences around their graves to keep livestock out, and that was one of the things. And also just to mark their area. You'll notice the different ways that people mark their areas. They would have a little wall around the plot, or they would have these wrought iron fences around the lot. And you'll notice that this is, I believe we see Mr. Stevens and his wife, Stevenson,
So is this who is buried here?
This is their
and
plot.
and what can you tell us about Mr. Stevens?
He was a very prominent citizen in the community in those early days. He sort of helped get everything organized, to become a city. And so he would be one of the key people at that time that we would see. He and his wife are buried here, and I think one or two of their children are in there with them. I think I saw Harriet Bond over here. Harriet, here we go. Harriet, come on down. And she was one of the early residents of the cemetery. She was married, actually, to the first white child born in the city of Springhill in 1809. And that was her husband. And of course, she was buried in here shortly after the 1840 time period.
Okay.
So there she is, Miss Harriet.
And so she lived right here in Springhill for most of her life.
Yes, And she and Mr. Bond lived together, and she was buried here. Yeah.
Okay, so where are you taking us
Well,
next?
I want to take you over here to someone that...
Okay, so we've moved over now to the very next gated area here in the cemetery. And who was buried here?
Well, actually, Fanny was not buried here. She was buried over on the other side here, but
Okay.
she may have just wandered over here to visit the folks that were buried here.
Okay, and what can you tell us about Fanny Ferguson?
Fanny Ferguson was a mother-in-law to Mr. John, let's see, I'm trying to think, Branham, Mr. Branham. He was the founder of the Branham and Hughes Academy. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm thinking that it may have been because she was from this area that he chose to come to Spring Hill with his academy. That's just a theory of mine, but I do believe he came down for that purpose, and that's why Ferguson Hall is named Ferguson Hall.
Oh, that's right. So it was named after her.
Ferguson's
and her
in
family.
Spring Hill, right, and their family. So it's a nice gesture on the part of a son-in-law to do that.
Would this be Miss Fanny right here, Ferguson?
I think I saw her coming through, yes.
All right. Who would she be visiting over here?
I am not sure. It's I have to look in the daylight to actually remember all these places.
Yeah.
You know, there are hundreds of people out here that have been buried. And since 1840, if you stop and think about the fact that people have been buried here since 1840, and unfortunately, there are some people that are in here whose graves are not marked. And we can look at that over to the back part over here to the east, where the slaves were buried. We have a section over here that was for that purpose. And so a lot of those graves are not marked. And we had Civil War soldiers that were buried here initially that were not marked. So we might just say goodnight to Miss Fanny Ferguson and walk on over this way.
Okay, so where are we now?
This is the burial area for Aaron White and Mrs. White. You'll notice again the prominent wrought iron fence. And again, that one of the more affluent families would have these kind of things. And Dr. Aaron White was very prominent during this early time period from the early 1840s on through. Built the house down the road here, which we call White Hall.
Right.
And that White Hall had a thing. And Mrs. White, of
and
course.
White Hall is one of our historic homes.
That is correct. That is
if
correct.
I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. And Dr. White, he's the one that brought the general down to Ferguson Hall, or my house at that time.
General Van Dorn.
General Earl Van Dorn.
Okay.
And it was Mrs. White that she was the moral compass of Spring Hill, but she just said, not in my house, not in front of our kids, get him out of there. So Mrs. White, very, very strong personality, and she had a lot of things to do with the, I would say, the moral fiber of Spring Hill. And of course, being buried here by her husband, Aaron, and they did a lot of good things for the community as a medical team. And if we will. That's Mrs. White. Would you
And that
welcome
was
them?
all during the Civil War time period.
Particularly,
too,
yes.
wasn't it?
Of course, they were in Spring Hill in the 1930s, actually, before the cemetery was begun, and they had their house built down there. We'll just walk right through here.
So they had their house built here during the cemetery, or
Before, actually,
before
the house
cemetery
before
was
the
built.
cemetery was put in there. Of course, it's a wood frame house down there, just not brick, and that was Mrs. White's, and
Would they have cared for some of the soldiers that were injured?
they did. In fact, the kitchen area, the floors are stained there where Dr. White, and I'm sure Mrs. White also provided some assistance as they took care of the soldiers that had been wounded there in their house.
And so what do we have here?
This is a collection of monuments here. There were like 69 Civil War soldiers that were buried here in the Springhill Cemetery. Some were buried right after they were killed, and others were buried at other locations where nearer the battle where they died. And then later on, during the 1880s, some of those soldiers were exhumed and brought here to Spring Hill because they were from the batteries and the groups that were stationed here in Spring Hill. And you'll notice that these markers have recently been put in. In fact, they were put in here in 2014 by the Nathaniel Chairs, Sons of the Confederate Veterans. And so they've done this. And the marker back here, the big marker, is Confederate States of America. You'll notice the CSA. This marker here is for Captain Freeman, and he was an artilleryman, and he was actually executed by the Union forces during the battles around this area, and he was brought here along with these other soldiers, and you'll notice many of them are from Tennessee and other areas like that. And there's a lot of activity in this part of the cemetery. You'll notice different people moving about. A lot of people visit this site because it is historically significant, and we have the Civil War battle flags marking these. The Nathaniel Chairs unit of the Sons of the Veterans, Confederate Veterans, are responsible for this. They raised all the money and put it in place here. There were about 69 soldiers buried here. Some of them were in unmarked graves. Others were dedicated to the ones that are marked here. You'll notice that this cross-like thing at the top of the monuments, you'll see some metal replicas of that marking the graves of Civil War veterans.
Well, let's follow.
Yeah, let's go.
Mr. Martin Shares, thank you so much for giving us the tour. We really appreciate it. It's great hearing all the stories of all the history here and who's been buried here. I want to thank you. But where's he going?
I don't know.
I wanted to thank Martin Shares for giving us the tour.
Yeah,
and he
just
started
headed
walking off.
Yeah, he did. He was kind of in a hurry.
So I don't know where he went. I'm looking for him. It's kind of dark out here. Where? Oh,
Well, I think we got some. Here they are right now.
okay. Mr. Shares? Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
Wonder where he's going.
That was really weird.
But, yeah,
They just kind of appeared out of nowhere, and now they're just kind of walking off now.
I know. You know, we want to thank Dionne Collins, too, for bringing the reenactors here to our show. But you know what's really strange?
What's that?
When I talked to her, she told me that there was only going to be 3.
There's only gonna be 3 actors here.
Yeah.
Reenactors. Well, where'd everybody else come from?
I don't know.
Wow. Well, that's.
And you know, I don't remember her really saying that Martin Shares was going to be here.
And he looked very similar to the actual Martin Shares. So
I know.
I don't know. That's kind of creepy. Wow, what a way
Where
to.
did they all go? They're all gone.
They're all gone now. I don't.
So
We're stuck in a cemetery.
I know. And it's cold and dark and the moon's out.
Are you ready?